Thanks for having a good conference over there in Santa Fe.
Yes, sir.
Alrighty, so we're a little bit pressed for time, so we're going to breeze through the first part of the presentation, and then we'll get to the second half. First, we're going to cover a decade of legal aquaponic cannabis, which is super exciting. The very first talk about aquaponic cannabis at all was 10 years ago today at the conference, and we'll touch on that. Alrighty. And then we'll talk about the facility built over in Thailand. Those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Raisner of Ponics. I've been in the legal aquaponic cannabis industry for 11 years. We've had the first aquaponic cannabis plants featured at High Times, the first aquaponic cannabis company. I've worked at every continent except for Antarctica at this point, with farms on every continent. You get the idea. I've trained all the employees for the largest U.S., African, and Asian aquaponic cannabis facilities around the world. Just got done building the largest one in Asia, which we'll talk about later in this presentation. I'm also the host of the Growing with Fishes podcast, as well as co-host the Dat Smoke Show, and I also host the Aquaponic Cannabis Conference. So we've come a long way. 10 years ago, Tim Mann, Friendly Aquaponics, gave a whole hit piece about me in particular for speaking about aquaponic cannabis, saying we should ban it from the association, and here we are 10 years later, and we have multiple people speaking on aquaponic cannabis, and the industry is really leading the way in aquaponic research in terms of the science, pushing a lot of new methods that are well ahead of even some of the university research. The first one, a bit of a history timeline there. We're going to just skip through that, but you can see here kind of the timeline of aquaponic cannabis facilities opening between 2012 and now. Just seems to be a bit of a lag on the thing here. Okay. The major hurdles with aquaponic cannabis is how to provide enough potassium, phosphorus, manganese, and other micronutrients without harming the fish. Cannabis needs to have those higher levels or it doesn't thrive. How do you address pathogens? In aquaponics, cannabis is tested for pathogens at a much higher level than food is. So that's another thing you have to address with aquaponics that can be tricky if you don't know how to deal with it. How do you manage molds and pathogens and mildews and other things in your higher humidity environment with products like cannabis that have to be smoked? How do you manage your production, square footage, especially at larger scale, and crop rotation, which can be tricky if you don't manage it correctly? How to manage mineralization of fish waste correctly to reduce your overhead costs. How do you incorporate soil into your facility? Adding soil could increase terpenes anywhere from 1 to 300% compared to DWC or media bed results alone. And then we'll talk about that. And then also managing crop rotation and hunting. So early testing, you can see here's the work we did at Raisner Incorporated, doing side-by-sides. And then above, you can see the work that I did originally at the Aquaponics source, doing side-by-sides as well with Robbie there. It took us 3 runs to match the controls, and then after that, the 4th run, we were beating our controls. One of the biggest factors we noticed is with dual root zone and wicking beds, we were getting a 1 to 300% increase in terpenes, and we still see that today. What works and what doesn't? Adding soil, either dual root zone methods or wicking beds, or even just doing soil pots fed with aquaponic water, really is the way that almost all of the large-scale commercial facilities are going at this point. You simply get, if you want to get above 4% terpenes, it's the only way you're going to do it. You simply don't have the microbiology in the root system without it. Sand beds and wicking beds tend to have a lot more problems late in flower and have a lot more growth issues in general. I would avoid those. If possible, but you can do 6 pots, which do work pretty well, which is kind of similar to wicking beds. Supplementation, you have to supplement the systems. It's a complete myth that you can run a system without supplementation, and I think most of you guys know that already. DWC, while it can work, will reduce your yields by on average 15%, and can be much harder to manage, while increasing costs by as much as 30% due to the increased volume of water required for dosing. So it costs more, lower yield, it really isn't the best way to go. Recirculating systems versus decoupled. So recirculating systems are much cheaper, easier to manage, and have a lot less failure points. Decoupled systems have a lot more failure points, cost a lot more per run, and cost a lot more per year in water. bell siphons versus timers versus indexes. Bell siphons give you the most reliable. Timers double the number of failure points. It can be good if you're having issues or need to do really strange layouts. And then indexing valves are great if you're in a place like Barbados or Namibia and you have very limited water. But they do have much more failure points. They're much more prone to fail. And if they fail, you lose the whole greenhouse bed. DWC, media bed versus wicking bed versus dual root zones. You can see here again a bunch of different comparisons that we've done. Again, dual root zones really went on over everything else. We're having to skip through these pretty quick in the beginning to make sure we get through the presentation on time. Dual root zone media beds, again, gives you the most control, gives you the soil microbes, the aquatic microbes, gives you the fastest growth, easiest supplementation, and the number one thing is the advantage is that you can take any cultivar off the market, immediately plop it in, and maximize production, whereas DWC only or some of the other methods that people do try, there's a group in Canada that's done really well. They had to phenome on over 3,000 cultivars to find a handful that worked well in their system. It very much pigeonholes you and prevents you from quickly adapting to what the market wants. And that really pigeonholes you greatly in the cannabis industry. Dual root zone versus non-dual root zone, you can easily see here which set of roots you would want. It will increase your flowering sites on average of 38 to 46%, and increase your total yields anywhere from 30 to 50%. So quite a bit of a difference with and without that. Soil microbiology, you have to have those mycorrhizal fungi and the terrestrial microbes to really fully express the plant's immune system. That's what gives you those extra terpenes, flavonoids, cannabinoids, and other essential compounds and flavors that you're wanting. Your common aquaponic nutrient myths, fish poop has everything that plants crave. That's simply not true. A lot of people try to use an oxycrop of iron as their only source. It's a great way to overdose your arsenic and your boron. So be careful, with some of the different organic products out there. Just because it says organic doesn't mean you can't get yourself into trouble pretty quickly with it if you don't use it correctly. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about, especially organic certified stuff. And some of the stuff that people are trying to do is getting kind of dangerous, and we'll see that here later in the presentation. Over-engineering systems, I've seen some stuff that costs, ludicrous amounts of money for a 4x4 bed that's out there. And then rock dust, I've seen a couple of videos, it's going to fix all your stuff. That's simply not true. Here you can see supplemented versus unsupplemented aquaponic cannabis beds. And in front here you can see an unsupplemented dual root zone soil only aquaponic bed. The soil in the dual root zone, and in the back you can see one that was fed an additional 15% nutrients. I think you would want the one in the back. I don't know about you, but yes, they're both smokable. Yes, they both finished, but one of them had about 4 times the yield of the other. So you do have to supplement as much as people wish they did. So soil feeding, we're actually doing a large study next year in Oklahoma with one of the tribes in one of the universities in Oklahoma in order to improve out large-scale aquaculture use for growing cattle and livestock with cows. And that's one of the cool things that we're working on next year. You can see here, after 3 years using it on this facility, the dirt is just, or the soil is completely different here on the left versus the one on the right. You can see that's a Turtle Island Aquaponics outside of Norman. They have a wonderful facility there, and they've been doing a lot of research on this particular project. So definitely check them out if you haven't already. Heavy metal issue. Again, this is a heavy metal test that came from a consulting customer that I picked up that had failed for 4 times the legal limit from arsenic. You have to be careful. Again, kelp, rock phosphate, rock dust, all can get you into trouble if you don't properly use them as directed, or if you use them, overuse them. One of the important things to do is just make sure you get your stuff from trusted sources. Stuff like True Aquaponics, I work very closely with them. They heavy metal test all of their stuff. You don't have to worry about any of that if you're working with a good company like that. Another thing that the cannabis industry has really popularized is fish waste from aquaponics and aquaculture facilities as a fertilizer for the cannabis industry. You have fish shit, fish nor, there's a bunch of these different various products now. And they're extremely popular and something that all of you guys that have aquaponic facilities can quickly cash in on with the spread of cannabis across the United States. Even if you aren't a cannabis person, you can still sell your fish poop and people will be happy. The introduction of pre-natural farming methods and natural farming methods into aquaponics. has really been largely due to the cannabis industry and people working with that. We've done a lot of work with lactobacillus as well as IMO and IPMO, which we're going to talk about in this presentation. And that's basically utilizing local lactobacillus species, local indigenous organism species such as local saprophytic and other fungi, and then also IPMO, which is using your own and creating your own pesticides. So lactobacillus, you have it occurring in your labs, you're occurring in the whey, as you would for making cheese. The whey, as we use traditional cheese, is your lactobacillus, great for treating things like powdery mildew, septoria, root rot, any fungal outbreak on your plants. Also treats E. coli, salmonella, and pythium. There's 3 now commercial facilities that I've treated for E. coli and eliminated it within 14 to 30 days, depending on the size of the facility, with doing nothing but treating with lactic acid bacteria serum. So this is something you should be dosing every 2 weeks in your aquaponics facility, or at a rate of 1 to 1,000. You can check out the YouTube video. I have instructions on how to make it right there on the YouTube Bit channel. And it's a great way to increase food safety in your facility at extremely low cost of milk and water. Indigenous microorganisms is rice, using rice to collect local forest microbes and allowing them to help fill in some of the gaps in the mineralization of your aquaponics facility, helps increase phosphorus, potassium, especially micronutrients. You can create it, shelf stabilize it by weighing it equal parts of sugar, and then add it directly either to your mineralization tank or your NBDRs in order to dramatically increase the microbial biodiversity of your facility. What is indigenous predatory microbes? So this is the invention by Chris Trump. This is a method I've used both in Africa, Thailand, Oklahoma, Georgia, California, all over. And basically we utilize the same method as you would for IMO, only we had a 30% insect frass. You can see we added the crickets here. And you can see the fungi growing on the crickets. Well, we can take this, stabilize it with sugar, and then brew this up as a tea, and then spray this on the plants in order to create our own, basically equivalent to Bavaria bassiana, but it's much more aggressive and it works on a much wider range of insects. And we've even had people having success with it with broad mites, which is really incredible. So great thing to use early on. I would use it once the plant set in the flower with the veg. And certainly in your aquaponic vegetables, it's a great weapon to have. Just don't use it in your bees because you will infect your bees, as seen here. What can the aquaponics industry learn from cannabis? Propose legislation before the industry is regulated. So draft up some regulation that we can propose to regulators so that we don't get it forced down our throats the way that the cannabis industry did. Take the mistakes that they had and use it so that the aquaponics industry can really be, kind of safeguarded from that kind of stuff. Create info packets and informative videos for legislatures to educate them on the things that we feel are important. Propose white lists for best practices as well as pesticides and minerals in order to allow for easier compliance as well as regulatory control. All right, so that's the first half of the presentation. Now we're going to talk about building very large-scale facilities, and some of the ones that I've built, including the one I just finished building here in Thailand. All right, so the large facility considerations you have is power. The facility we just built in Pachacum uses the same amount of power as the nearest village does. So you need to take that into consideration when it comes to transmission lines and how easy it is to hook up heavier transmission lines to your property, and as well as transformers, making sure that you can get them up at a higher area in case there's a large flood, that doesn't get flooded out. Also, water use per day. Can the wells there handle the amount of water that you're going to be pumping out to manage a large-scale, large commercial facility? Because if they can't, it doesn't help you very much. Water availability. Is there water available year-round, or is it only year-round? What part of the year you need to store it? Like in Thailand, it doesn't rain from November until May, right? So we have to have extra retention ponds so that if we run out of water, we can just pump out one of those adjacent ponds and then keep going, which is how we have it here. We stagger with 3 separate ponds, pump one to the other to the other. Proper crop rotation planning is critical, and hunting is the other one that's extremely important when you're doing the large-scale facilities for predictability of production. You have 3 main designs. You have closed multi-loop, flooded field, and pond and trap. So we're going to talk about that. So closed multi-loop is the one that I prefer. Gives you the most control especially when you're doing pre-built systems. You're not trying to pull off of the tropics. We're trying to choose your pond. We've built quite a few of these now, and they work extremely well. The advantage is it's basically a hybrid of a closed loop and a decoupled. So it's a completely coupled system that's coupled to each greenhouse bay, and then you can move anywhere from 0 fish tanks to all the fish tanks to any given greenhouse bay, or open the whole thing up and run it all as one giant system. So you can run, either part of the system or the whole system as a separate area. So if you need to run different nutrient levels for different crops, it's easy, or veg and flower, you can very easily do that. So here's an example of a multi-loop, closed multi-loop facility in Oklahoma, and then here it is constructed. You can see the mineralization tanks in the back there next to the fish tanks, along with the grow bays there. Then you have a flooded field. This is really good for doing large-scale stuff. We've done some of these in Africa. I've done some designs for some other people I work with, and work closely with some other great people that are working in Africa that have done these as well. I'm going to show you that. So this is basically a giant media bed flooded from the pond. You can make these acre scale, which is super cool. And then you can walk across it when there's no water in the field, and then when it's flooded, you sink to the bottom, obviously, so don't do that. But the plants do just fine. And then here you can see our friends over at Aquaponics. Bob has got some work over there in Kenya. It's a great design for a low energy area. You can run these off of low energy solar pumps. It's perfectly fine if it takes 6 or 12 hours to flood over a full day. But it can be a great way anywhere in the tropics to really do this in a more of a humanitarian scale that makes sense at large scalability. And then pond and track. Pond and track is kind of a variation of that, where we do a pond off to a set of pre-mixed tanks that we can adjust nutrients so that if the pond isn't quite where we want it, we can kind of give it a little bit of a boost, either with organic or inorganic nutrients before it goes out to the grow beds. And then we flood that a couple times a day, depending on what we're doing. So you can see that here. You can see the grow bed tracks in the greenhouses. And then you can see the large pond there on the right. Here you can see the design, the original design for the greenhouses. We had a full sketch up of the facility to make it easier for the instructors. And then we sourced all the materials, which was a huge pain. Trying to find some of this stuff over there. Grow beds in particular was not impossible, so we had to have a bunch of custom made for us, and it basically would amount to like a thicker banner type material, like you use for the temporary koi ponds that you use for koi competitions, and had them made, which was the easiest solution. We'll go over that step by step on how we did that. Our neighbors almost burned our farm down in 420, burning a grass fire after we paid them to not burn anything on the farm. So that was also a really fun thing that we had while setting everything up. And then it took a long time to get our power set up. So we mainly grow cloud-knife fish, tilapias, snake heads, and then we do have a few catfish in there, platies and guppies, but this is a good example of what we have in the ponds there. This is one of our employees caught these to take them to market. We do have quite a few things there that can sting you. We have quite a variety of scorpions. We also have these extremely nasty stinging caterpillars there that are incredibly painful. It feels like an electrical burn. It really is not pleasant. So you have to be careful for those. High humidity being surrounded by rice fields. High level of insect pressure, mostly the thrips and mites, which we'll talk about in the next slide. Logistics, again, trying to get stuff. Sometimes it can be really easy, sometimes it can be horrible, depending on what it is you need there. And Chinese New Year, everything stops for like a month and a half over there, which sucks really bad. So make sure you get anything before then if you're over working there in Southeast Asia around then. So be sure to think about that. The legal unknowns in Thailand has been a huge struggle. They keep changing their mind on what they want to do, including threatening to make it illegal again. So that's been a bit of a nerve-wracking bit. And then sourcing good genetics has been very hard. We've had to look mostly at U.S. stock because the Thai stock really, with the exception of maybe 2 cultivars, we grew about 130 cultivars of Thai stuff and only found maybe 6 that we wanted to do anything with, and of those maybe 2 that were actually production worthy. So sifting through all the gene pool of the cannabis genetics in Thailand has been quite a pain, honestly. Mostly hermaphroditic traits, late in flower, starting to throw male branches. And then cloning in the heat, we've had to learn to add an extra 24 hours, or no, an extra 24 hours, an extra week. So we root them for 2 weeks, then we transplant them into small soil pots to get the root system larger for an extra week before putting them out. If you don't, they just fry in the tropics. It just doesn't work otherwise. And then bulkheads, we had to basically fabricate our own bulkheads because they're extremely hard to get for whatever reason in Thailand. So we had to basically craft our own with PVC, which was not fun. This was our biggest enemy over there. This is a type of thrift native to Thailand, but these guys would blow up in the winds. We get a big windstorm and we managed to blow through the screens there, and we'd have to beat them back again. So that was by far the biggest pain of our existence, and most farmers' existences over there in Thailand year-round. So here's our model facility. These are all soil plants that are fed up from aquaponic water. We do that just because we have a larger volume units like these out, and then we want them to grow a little bit slower because if I have to grow them in aquaponics, they're just going to grow so fast that we're not going to have the labor time to have everything back on the weekly schedule. Here's our nurseries. This is the main nursery that has all the clone cuts and the seedlings. The one on the right has all of our older plants, like I was saying, they get transplanted into the pots for a week, or 2 weeks, and they go into there for a week to 10 days. Before going out to the greenhouse or being sold. There's our pond. We had 2 of those that were a couple hundred feet long by about 40 feet wide, and they're about 30 or 40 feet deep, extremely deep in the deep part. And then there's a good example of some of the Ponics that were in there. We used to fish for them all the time. So this is the beginning of construction. You can see all the footers laid out for our greenhouse facilities there. Now this is really important. You can see the double vented umbrella style. That really is important for dumping the heat out. If you're doing anything in the tropics, this design is the best design for dumping heat without having mechanical stuff going. You're still going to need fans because sometimes the heat to really blow through with the wind and then get pulled out as well as dump that heat out. Here's the excavation along the piping going in for the beds. Here's what it looked like once that was backfilled afterwards. You can see the dogs had to put their mark on it. The guard dog should be rescued from the dump. Alright, so once this is all poured, we're going to go ahead and put the frames on. You can see everything's nice and mostly straight, you can see. And a couple of those that are a bit of an angle. Again, having to make our own bulkheads makes it a huge pain in the bum. Then we put the screen on the greenhouse, that's drip screening. We do put plastic on the upper portion, where the roof is, and then we use screen for the sides, just standard drip screening. And then we do have a separate entrance there in the front. You can see here now we have all the rebar cut and laid out for the greenhouse grow beds. And those all get welded together, and those are all to the same size as our custom made grow beds. This is our premix tanks in the pot. The 2 pipes here, one comes in from our city water, which is our village water, which comes from a local reservoir that's filtered. The other one comes directly from the pond next door, so if we ever need to balance it, if the nitrogen gets a little high in the pond or whatever, we can always cut that with other water if we need to for whatever reason. And then if I need to flush them, I can just use clean water right at the end. And then we use this water out of these tanks to flood the beds. So then we go ahead and put our grow beds on the frames. You can see here the flood depth is about 3 or 4 inches there. And the bottom part of the pot is gravel, and we have soil on top. You can see the control panel here. This is for the top, and then on the right here, we haven't quite put the panel on yet. It has all the switches for the fans and the lights on. And then you can see here on the left, all the little pots have been put out on the bigger pots, so it can get transplanted, and then these ones here on the right have been transplanted. And then here they are a little bit farther along, it's after another week or so. And they are around 2 weeks later, right when they get about a week in the flower once they got flipped. And then you can see an example of some of the buds there on the right. There's some more on the left there is a freak show type. I don't remember which freak show, but I think that's just freak show or freaky feel. On the right there is a blueberry cross. And then we have a couple of different ones here. I don't remember which ones these are. If you guys are looking to open source any of your genetics, so your cool vegetable line your grandma gave you, and you want to put it into open source so that no one can ever have that cultivar and steal it from you from Monsanto, or you want to do that with cannabis plants. For vegetables, check out Open Source Seed Initiative. For cannabis, check out Copyleft Cultivars. They're both really good groups of people that are helping do the open source genetics fight for the good side in the market. So check them out if you're needing to preserve your genetics in that way. I have a huge database called Open Nutrient Project on how to formulate your own organic nutrient ferments, teas, compost teas, aquaponic and soil amendments. We have a huge database of which plants in your yard will have the most potassium, iron, magnesium, whatever, all sorted by mineral and sort by Latin names so that you can find them and easily translate to other languages at Aquaponics.com/LNP. And you can find all that information there. You can see the different nutrient levels for the different crops there, as well as a huge range of test kits. If you need a test kit for anything in aquaponics, I do have all of those listed there, sorted by test per box, price, manufacturer, nutrients, test kit range, and also if you're trying to find how to test for a given nutrient, that database is also there for free on the website as well. Check that out. Again, Aquaponics/LNP. Just stay on that slide. All right, so you can also check out my podcast, Go on the Fish the Podcast. We have over 1,000 hours of educational content. Also, the Aquaponics YouTube channel. We also have 3 years of the Aquaponic Cannabis Conference, which will be coming back again next year. I've just been traveling a little bit too much to put it on this year. And we have new episodes each week. We have a huge library of people from the previous Aquaponic conferences as well. Many people have been on there that are probably sitting there watching this at the moment. Also, check out my email, aquaponics@gmail, if you have any questions. Growing the Fishes Podcast is my favorite app. We have Aquaponic Cannabis class at apmdclass.com, class@class.com, and a Facebook group at Aquaponic Cannabis Growers, and also Den certified educators. If you ever have any questions about Den certification, I'm happy to answer those as well. Thank you guys for watching, and if you guys have any questions, I think I somehow made it another time.
Sure, what about sand ponics, using sand as a growing medium?
Can you hear him, Steve?
Hey, yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm here in New Mexico, and someone told me, hey, you all have great potential for sand ponics. You should use sand to grow your cannabis. You don't need to add nutrients. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so the sand stuff can work if you use the right size sand. I mean, Epcot Center does have a facility, but mostly with that type of stuff, it tends to go anaerobic, and then also if you don't use the right grain size, it tends to lock up pretty badly and cause all kinds of issues. But for the most part, you're going to end up with this fish waste near the surface, which then becomes a food safety issue, being not, directly on top of the available to the plants and any splashing or anything like that. And then also, again, the anaerobic buildup of the fish waste. If you weren't using things like green natural farming inputs to try and break it down, you're simply not going to have the biology there to break that down and make that, a viable system.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Steve, can you talk about varieties and growing? Like, do all varieties work well in different growing mediums? Like if you did deep water culture, dual root. I mean, were the pots that you have soil, or were those cocoa coir, or what were in those?
Sure. So there was a gravel medium at the bottom that the roots grow into, with the flood and drain portion at the bottom, and the upper portion is soil.
Yeah.
Is how those work.
So, what about genetics and type of system? Is that a thing?
Sure. So you always have about 5% of cultivars that just hate whatever it is that you grow in it. So if you're trying to grow DWC, get one soil. If you're trying to grow soil, get one DWC or whatever. So you always have about 4 to 5% of the ones that are just pouty. But other than that, you definitely can have cultivars that really excel in certain ones. You can definitely see that with like the cake, caviar cake that, as an example, that Habitat Life has up in Canada. That's one that they've really bred specifically for DWC production and aquaponics. That's really the only one that comes to mind that's really been kind of pigeonholed genetically towards that direction. That's really, again, one of the things that we found with the DWC is it seems to be much more hit and miss with the cultivar species than the other grow methods. Even media bed seems to be a little bit more forgiving. But if you have even the small, shallow soil layers, and if you have those mycorrhizae and the soil microbes, that seems to really help get around that, as well as increasing terpene expression. And also for trees as well, if you're trying to grow trees or anything woody, the woodier the crop, the more it needs mycorrhizal fungi to create that lignin. And without that, you're not going to have a plant really excel. So if you're doing any fruit trees, as an example, that would be another one that you really want to do in a root zone, a larger scale, scaled up the root zone, to maximize that fruiting potential.
Hey Steve, I'm not familiar with the indexing values system you talked about.
Oh, did I spell that wrong? If I misspelled it on the slides, but the index values, yes, the index values are basically one pipe that has multiple outputs and it rotates, usually has a mechanical piece inside of it. We use those at a facility in Kingston, Jamaica, and we had one fail and it killed 4 rows of plants. So I really hate them after that, but they're good as long as you have someone or some kind of electronic way of monitoring the voltage on them to make sure that they're working.
Okay, I guess I probably misread the slide. Thanks.
What's that, sir?
I got it.
Give him the thumbs up.
Does anybody else have any other questions?
I don't have a question, but I know like for my grow operation, when we it's small, when we had problems with like insects, like for instance aphids, I noticed that when we planted something else, like for instance sunflowers, and they preferred like the sunflowers over the flowers, right? And so maybe the issue with your pest control, maybe you should find something that they prefer over the cannabis to keep them, and maybe plant them around the outside of your facilities or something, so they'll be attracted to that plant as opposed to the crop.
Yeah, so the use of bait plants is used quite a bit. You just have to be hyper aggressive on replacing them, otherwise you can have really big issues with them breeding extra insects in the facility. So in general, they're kind of not used as much, but they are used occasionally in that particular instance. But most of the time we're using biocontrols, so we're using the Variabaciana, IPMO, Aceriothus ceracea, Metarhizium, things like that, as on a rotation to use control, because all of those are smokable compliant, because we can't have any residues that would be an issue if you're combustible. A great example would be mycobutanol. Mycobutanol, Eagle 20 is used all the time in vegetables, for fruit, vegetables, and apples, oranges, things like that. But if you smoke it, it turns into hydrogen cyanide. So that's a pretty big problem.
So don't turn an apple into a pipe.
Well, let's give Steve a round of applause.
Have a good rest of your conference, everyone.
Thanks.
You have a cold one.